So now we're going to do Chapter 12, Part 4. So far we have covered the Freud psychodynamic approach as well as the Neo-Freudians in the first two videos, and in video 3 we covered the humanistic perspective. So in video 4 here we're going to look at the trait perspective and see how that affects our personality development, or how that influences how we grow and develop. So in the trait theorists, we have also have our social cognitive theories and the sense of self. The social cognitive theories we're going to cover in video 5. So we're going to concentrate just simply on the trait theories and the perspectives. So getting to know who you are, getting to see what those qualities that you can actually see in yourself. The trait theories believe that we have certain characteristics that we exhibit all the time. So these traits are something that is across all components of our life. So that we have stable components of our personality like dimensions and factors. We're going to look at how we assess those traits. How do we figure out what traits are our strengths and what are not? So we're going to look at things like the MMPI, the 5 factors of Canoe, and then we're also going to look at some of the impact of traits on situations and some of the situational impacts on our traits. Some of the social cognitive influences we'll talk about a little bit later are reciprocal determination, internal versus external locus of control, and optimism and positive psychology. So, personality is seen in the palms and stars, and handwriting and crystal balls and tea leaves and scattered bones. These are some of the things that we used to use to kind of determine what someone is like or what's going to happen. So by saying something that is vague and likely to be true of you, then following up on comments that you reinforce by nodding, someone can appear to see into your soul. You too can turn your keen sense of the obvious into a career predicting the present. So when we look at things and people start agreeing or look like they're confused, we can change exactly what we're talking about. And so the trait theory of personality, it looks into specific characteristics, so it's a little bit more scientific. When we look at the traits theory of personality, Gordon Allport decided that Freud overvalued unconscious motives and undervalued our real, observable personality styles and traits. So Myers and Briggs wanted to study the individual behaviors and statements to find out how people differed in personality, and that having those different traits and how those different traits actually influence our behavior. So can we predict behavior by knowing a person's behavior or personality type? Myers-Briggs is one of the most common personality assessments that are used, especially in the business world. So these are it's a giant set of questionnaire that people have self-report, so we report what we think about ourselves, and it categorizes people into certain traits. So the Myers-Briggs actually has 16 different categories. Others have 5, and there are various different ones, but they're all looking at the exact same thing. They're looking at what kind of characteristics do we have. So a trait is defined as an enduring quality that makes a person tend to act a certain way. So some examples of traits would be being honest, shy, hardworking. The Myers-Briggs type indicator actually come in pairs. So they have 4 sets of dichotomy. So we have the judging versus perceiving, thinking versus feeling, and so you're going to fit on one side or the other. And then we have the 16 different combinations that can come into play from those 4 different pairs that they have. The trait theory of personality says that we are made up of a collection of traits, behavioral predispositions, that can be identified and measured. And these traits differ from person to person. And so we each have our own individual blueprint of what makes us who we are. So when we look at traits, how do we acquire these traits? Some individuals look at biology. So are our traits rooted in biology? The brain differences, and extroverts tend to have low levels of brain activity, making it hard to suppress impulses and leading them to seek stimulation. So we know that extroverted are externally motivated. They thrive off of the excitement of the external world, where introverts tend to thrive off of the internal world of their own minds. When we look at the body, the trait of shyness appears to be related to high autonomic system reactivity and is easily triggered with an alarm system. And so, is there a biological basis for that shyness? Are we trying to avoid that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system components being activated? And when we look at genes, we can do selective breeding of animals, and it can create lifelong differences in traits such as aggression, sociability, calmness, suggesting that there is a genetic root to these particular traits. So if we can breed them in or breed them out, we must be able to have some sort of genetic component to that. One of the common trait assessments is the factor analysis that Eysenck's personality dimensions developed. So on this slide, you can see if you can pinpoint where you are in those 4 quadrants. So Eysenck's believed that we fit in one of the 4 areas. So we are either in the unstable extroverted category, the extroverted stable category, stable introverted, or the introverted unstable category. So our factors these are descriptors that describe us most. Now I will say that I am mostly in the extroverted stable category. So I'm very sociable, very outgoing, very talkative, very responsive to others, very easygoing for the most part. Very lively, very carefree, and I have strong leadership skills. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have some characteristics in some of the other areas. So if we look at the stable introverted category, I am also very controlled. I do not like a lot of change. I'm very reliable. I tend to be very even-tempered and calm, but can get very agitated, so there are circumstances that can actually alter that personality trait. So there's not really a perfect one quadrant, but you'll find that you're mostly going to be in one side or the other of this. And so I have very few unstable characteristics. And unstable is not a negative concept. Unstable in this case means changeable, so it's something that actually moves frequently. I am not pessimistic. I think we talked about that earlier. I do not like change at all, so I am very unchangeable. I'm not impulsive. I think out everything that I do. I am very optimistic, though, and so those are factors that would describe me. So when you look at yourself, can you put yourself in one of those categories? So his factors analysis was looking at identifying factors that tend to cluster together. And so when these traits tend to happen, they tend to happen together in groups. So using the factor analysis, he found that many personality traits actually are a function of 2 basic dimensions, the stable versus unstable and the extroverted versus introverted. And so some research does support their ideas and that these variations are linked to genetics. When we look at assessing traits and using questionnaires, these are personality inventories and questionnaires that are assessing many different personality traits by asking which behaviors and responses that you would choose. So these are self-report, which means you indicate what you like and how you like those traits only. So there are some discrepancies amongst that, so we feel that if we can get a wider view of an individual, maybe we ask close individuals around you to choose things to see if they would match yours or not. There are empirical derived tests, though, so that means we have measured these and we've tested them over time, and we have all of the items have been selected because they have predictability and a match to the qualities being assessed. And so those questions have been validated. We also have the MMPI, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, and this is designed to identify people with personality difficulties. So remember, we have 2 different things going on here. We can measure individuals who have what considered a healthy personality development and those who are not developing in healthy manners as well. So these tend to be true-false questionnaires. Items were selected because they correlated with various different traits, emotions, and attitudes. And so some example would be depressed people tend to answer true to nothing in paper interests me except the comics. And so they have questions that really relate to particular behaviors around those characteristics to identify when somebody has something going on that we need to take note of. The Big 5 personality factor is developed from Eysenck's people that felt that there are varied along 2 different dimensions, but there are current cross-cultural research and theory supports the expansion of the dimensions to 5 different factors. Those 5 factors are conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion. So you can see the word canoe that is spelled down along the side if we take the first of each of those letters. And each of these traits has a component that's related to many of the things that all personality trait theorists kind of agree upon. So you can see that extroversion is there, and we already saw that in Eysenck's grouping as well, extroversion versus introversion. Where do we draw our energy from? Are we drawing our energy from the socialization of others, or do we draw our energy from the quiet time with ourselves? The conscientiousness, so that self-discipline, the carefulness, pursuit of delayed goals, agreeableness, helpful, trusting, friendly, neuroticism, anxiety, insecurity, emotional instability, openness, flexibility, nonconformity, and variety. And these are on a continuum, so we have the one side on here, and then we have the other extreme on the other side, and we can fit somewhere in between in that continuum. When we look at questions about traits, the topics that are subjects of ongoing research, we have stability. Are one's distinctive mix of traits change, or doesn't it change much over our lifetime? So when we look at these traits, we can see that for the majority of us, for many of the traits that we have, we do not change much throughout our entire lifetime. But there are traits that grow and develop as we mature as well, and so we can moderate some traits as we mature, and we can actually change some over our lifespan. So when everyone in adulthood becomes a little more conscientious and agreeable, and less extroverted and neurotic and unstable, and less open or imaginative and flexible. We have some predictive value. The levels of the success in work and relationships relates to traits such as openness and conscientiousness. And then the heritability, so how much is inherited. For most traits, genes account for about 50% of the variation among individuals. So the other 50% is going to be connected to your environmental factors that come and play a role in that as well. When we look at change versus consistency that shifts with age, over the years of development, we change interests, attitudes, roles, jobs, relationships. We develop skills, maturity. So do these traits stay stable throughout all of those changes? So the evidence shows that it does take time for personality to stabilize, and traits do change, but less and less over the time. So we kind of are still figuring out who we are in those early childhood and adolescent years, but once we figure out all of the traits that are working solidly for us, we become much more stabilized in those traits. So we change less and become much more consistent as we age. When we look at the person-situation controversy, we are looking at the trait theory assumes that we have traits that are a function of personality, not of situation. There is much evidence that some traits are linked to roles and to personas we use in different cultures and environments. And so when I'm at work, I have to dress a certain way, I have to act a certain way, I have to be a certain way. And so those traits that I exhibit there, while they're not drastically different than any other situation, I think they are more pronounced there. And we do see that different traits we kind of let flow a little bit more freely in various different situations. So different situations may bring out different circumstances amongst us. The last slide in this video is looking at how personality affects a situation and is not just a function of the situation. So your Facebook post, your website, music lists, choice of ringtones, these are all reflective of your personality. These choices also may shape how others will treat you and how they actually react to you. So by getting to know you, they know how to interact with you, which can also then affect your behaviors as well. So when we look at this room in the picture here, it may reflect the personality of the guy who lives there, but the setup and contents of the room may also just shape his personality. So it may determine behaviors that he does as well. And so it's kind of an interplay and the interaction of both of those as they go through life, adjusting our environment to our personality and our personality to our environments.